We faced a lot of things. Sometimes we faced overt racism. Rarely. More often than that, it was just insensitivities, ignorance. But it was what we signed up for. And it was difficult. It was hard for my children because they were too young to really understand what we were doing and why. And it was hard to be the only black kids around. But if I believed what I believed, then what were the options? What were the alternatives? It was difficult from another perspective as well. It was difficult from the perspective of having conversations on more than one occasion where people to my face accused me of selling out. And I was saying, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait. Because you go to Promise Keepers rallies and you will do pulpit swaps and you will do all of these sorts of things. But now that I've decided to take this to another level and make a personal commitment with my life and my family's life, I'm selling out. Then what are we really trying to do? I was accused, and this one was always difficult, of robbing the black church of its best and brightest. Now, on the one hand, thanks for the compliment.
Thank you, Pastor. I do appreciate you.
But on the other hand, what do I do with that? Because part of me is going, what a horrible way to think about the church. You're black, therefore you belong to this group. And your gifts and graces and talents and abilities belong to this group. And it's robbery for you to take them and for you to get. But on the other hand, I distinctly remember when I graduated from Southwestern Seminary, receiving a questionnaire from a black PhD student. I forget what school they were at, black PhD student who was doing research for their dissertation and wanted me to fill out this questionnaire because less than 15% of all black ministers in this country, according to their research, had seminary education. So this was their research project trying to figure out, okay, what is it that led you in this direction? And what is it that helped you to stay the course? And what is it that, can you see how it'd be torn? Having conversation with my wife and children when certain things would happen. Constantly having that wrestle and that struggle with, is this tokenism or is it real? And regardless of what it is this the commitment or is it not? And if I do have a problem with the way people understand me or don't understand me, can I simultaneously fault people for not understanding me and then not make myself available so that they can have a relationship with me and learn to understand me? How dare you white people who don't have relationships with black people not understand us? Do you see the dilemma?
Do you know why?
And it's a double-edged sword. Because ironically, now that part of my history is often leveraged against me in this entire discussion. You don't get a voice in this discussion. You don't get a dog in this fight because you abandoned your people. I just want you to sit with that. Okay. The lingering question. And what do you? Ephesians chapter 2. And in the time we have left, I want us to just walk through this and see the truth from God's sufficient word about our unity and reconciliation that exists. We don't have to achieve racial reconciliation. It exists. It has been achieved. It is a reality that we must walk in, but it's not something that we have to accomplish. It's already been accomplished. Therefore, remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. That's bad news. There's a parallel here to the first part of the chapter, right? In the first part of chapter 2, we start with bad news. Dead in trespasses and sins, alienated. I mean, it's just bad news. And then we have that but God. Here we have bad news, and then we have but now. But before we get to the but now, let's rest here in this bad news. Because in order to understand the magnitude of the reconciliation, you have to understand the magnitude of the division. And look again at it. You Gentiles in the flesh.
The magnitude of the division.
Called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision. I want you to understand that the division that God overcomes here is more significant than anything that we face. Why? Because race is arbitrary. Racial classifications are not real classifications. There is but one race. There's virtually no genetic difference between us. By the way, if we were not of the same race, we couldn't reproduce with one another. There is one race. We have the same original parents. Amen? We're multiple ethnicities, but one race. And the racial distinctions between us are arbitrary distinctions based on certain features that we have, but not based on real differences. They are arbitrary. And sometimes we see these when the Hutus and the Tutsis experienced genocide in Rwanda. People look at that and when we go, well, I don't get that. These people look the same to me. Do you realize that the genetic difference between the Hutus and the Tutsis is small, but the genetic difference between white people and black people is almost as small? But the difference between Jew and Gentile was established by God himself and was not arbitrary, but real. You know what that means? If God can reconcile those who have real and God-ordained distinctions between them, he can certainly reconcile people who have arbitrary and artificial differences and distinctions between them.
Right.
And look at this, verse 12. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. It's not just that the Gentiles were outsiders related to another ethnic group. It's not just that Gentiles were separated from the cultural hegemony, if you will. It's not just that there were systems that were oppressing them. It's not just that they didn't have access to wealth. It was, you are alienated from God and from Christ. This is real.
Family, I have to say that is the best sermon that I've ever had in my life. You know, that I have learned a lot from Pastor. It's not easy for you to leave your home church and go races. You know, he actually felt like crying at some point as he was explaining what he went through, how his church judged him after he left his church with the quest of trying to unite the human race. Before I say any other thing I'd like just to give him his flowers. His actions are not actions of any other pastor. His actions are not self-driven. His action is so selfless. And for that, I give you your flowers, Pastor Boucham. So in this sermon, he starts by saying racial reconciliation, you know, and he is pushing for reconciliation. What does God say about us? He asks that question. Is what God saying about us sufficient? Sin nowadays is institutional. Nowadays, people don't go through scriptures to solve issues, but other books. I believe that the Bible is absolutely sufficient on matters of faith and practice and how we deal with another across ethnicities. It's a matter of faith in practice. The Bible is sufficient for that. You know, Pastor Boucham believes that there is no need for people to be reading or rather to put other books as reference points when it comes to matters race. He thinks that the Bible with itself is sufficient. We do not need to check other books by different authors, which are not the Bible in regards to matters races. I am not arguing that we shouldn't read other books, but the Bible is sufficient. Nowadays, we've got sociology books governing our theology, and that's not okay. Is the Bible sufficient when it comes to matters racial reconciliation? Tell me down below, guys. Is the Bible sufficient when it comes to matters racial reconciliation? Or are there other texts that have to inform our reading of the text to achieve righteousness? I believe in racial reconciliation because I believe in the Bible. In the church, I have met people who are passionate about racial reconciliation and are asking me how they could achieve it. He said he's met white people who are actually very, very passionate when it comes to matters racial reconciliation. And they've been asking him, how can they be able to achieve it? I decided that if I was serious about black, remember he was a pastor in a church that everyone was black, but he wanted to reconcile the different races, different ethnic groups. So he decided that he will only go to a church that has a mixed races. He doesn't want to go to a church that everyone looks like him. It was hard. Took a position on predominantly white church, and it was tough. We faced a lot of things, sometimes racism, sometimes insensitivity, sometimes ignorance. It was hard for me and my family, but I believed racial reconciliation would work. I was accused of moving from the black church to the white church. What an horrible way to think about the church. Black folks from his other church spoke to him and accused him for leaving their church and going to a white church in his quest to try to reconcile races. He quotes Ephesians chapter 2, verses 10 to 11. We do not have to accomplish racial reconciliation. It has already been achieved. That's what Pastor Baucham believes. In order to understand the magnitude of reconciliation, you have to understand the magnitude of the division between these two races. The division that God overcomes is more significant than anything we face, because race is habitual. Racial classification are not real classification. There is only one race. If we were not of the same race, we couldn't reproduce with one another. He believes that the human race is just one race. There's nothing like white and black. There's nothing like colored people. Nothing like yellow, brown, and red. Nothing like blue eyes and red eyes and all those color definitions. He believed that all human beings are one. And if all of us can actually reproduce, if we go in a sexual intercourse together, irrespective of the color of our skin, it means that we are one race. We have the same original parents, multiple ethnicities, but one race. He gives an example of the Hutus and Tutsis, genocides in Rwanda. You understand, the two ethnic groups really fought in the history of Rwanda. They were the same people. The difference between them was actually very, very small. And they took their differences and started genocide in their own country. The difference between white and blacks is almost as small as that of Hutus and Tutsis. And we saw what happened. We saw the implications of their fight together. Things came from good to bad. But the difference between the Jew and Gentile was established by God himself. If God can reconcile those who have real and God-ordained distinctions between them, he certainly reconcile people who have habitually. If God himself could be able to reconcile the people that he himself ordained the distinctions that they have together, what about us as the black folks? What about white folks? Our issues are actually not ordained spiritually. But when we look at the issues of the Jews and Gentile, the issue was more serious. It was ordained by God, their differences. If God could be able to reconcile them, the people who God ordained the distinctions between them, what about us? This is a challenge to us. What about us? It is possible for us to reconcile. It is possible for white folks to come and try and make amends to black folks. How does this thing start? I feel the only way they can do that is by them accepting, number one, accepting that their ancestors did wrong to our forefathers. That's the first point. The second point is for them to accept reparations. That's the only way black folks will feel sorry. That's why I always push for reparations. That's why I support reparations, because I do believe that when you say sorry, when you try to compensate people for the wrong you did, people can easily get along. People can easily accept your apology because they know that in your heart, you're indeed sorry. In your heart, you indeed want to make amends. Let us continue. Remember that at a time you were separated from Christ, eliminated from Commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenant of promise, having no hope without God. It's not just that the Gentiles were outsiders. It's not just that they were systems oppressing them. It was just about being away from Christ. You know, being away from Christ is actually the big thing, not what we are fighting about here. Not about the systematic racism, not about supremacy, nothing like that. According to the Gentiles, you know, the differences they had between the Jews and Gentiles, what the Gentiles really missed was having a personal relationship with God. And that was huge than the difference they had with the Jews. The same way, the issue of prejudices between the races we have is useless. We should find God, love the God's teachings, come together as a people because we only have one God. God will be our unifying factor. It's time that Black folk and white folk start working on a reconciliation model. And I really hope that this is workable. And according to Pastor Bauchem, he believes that reconciliation has already started and that it has been achieved. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Kindly do consider subscribing to my channel for amazing Black stories in Africa and in the diaspora. Currently, I'm doing a series on Black history in the US. I hope you're enjoying it. Go check out my other videos if you haven't checked them. And let us learn together, man. I am also learning right now as I am doing these videos, and this is one of the best videos I have ever done, man. The racial reconciliation by Pastor Bauchem. Thank you, guys. Comment down below. Let us learn together. Like this video so that it can be recommended to other YouTube users, and I'll be so grateful, guys. See you all in my next video. Goodbye for now. Adios.
And we thank you so much, my brother and pastor. However, you doing your channel, your work on, you know, Black America and history and stuff. I think you probably need to be, don't tell us to, you know, no, don't advise us, you know, to go with this racial reconciliation, because that's not what we is talking about doing. That's what y'all talking about doing with all them white folks that y'all listening to. So, brother, don't let Pastor Nim rope you in there where you get us to sleeping and lollygagging and forgetting about our ancestors again. And I want to say, on behalf of our ancestors, this is our book for racial reconciliation. Until y'all can get white people to stop ignoring the theft of melanin, the atrocious crimes that they've done and they still doing to us, don't talk to us about no racial reconciliation. Do not come talking to us about no racial reconciliation when you done set up here, right here. Life as we know it is over. Y'all don't see that either? Everybody done stagnated and done stood us still, stirred us every which way but the right way. Life as we know it is over. We head into a new world order. We ain't got a pot to piss again. So no, don't come at us with this racial reconciliation with the Bible. Because as far as that and stuff, the Bible and stuff, if you really want to dig into it and stuff, the 12 disciples, them 12 disciples, they was like the 12 constellations with Jesus centered as the sun. That's a whole nother book that we will be reading, because I didn't know either. Pastor Ray Hagins, listen to him. We got a lot of Black scholars instead of just ingesting this European, the white man's ideals and programs and agendas. Why y'all got to keep sacrificing us? Why y'all get to these high positions? You graduate, you go to college, you go to school, you get yourself in these positions, you sit at these tables and stuff, you get these degrees and stuff, and then you stare our motherfucking ass right the opposite way. And you know, When you say Jesus, you know we sin. What's that man name? Dang. We ain't seeing him. We ain't seeing this man right here. When y'all say Jesus. When y'all say Jesus, we are not seeing this man right here, Black Jesus. And y'all know why. But y'all still wanna keep us where we don't know. Okay, the Bible is about the chosen people, us. Tell it all then. Tell it all. Didn't Putin just tell y'all? Didn't Putin just tell the whole world that they worship Black Jesus, Black Madonna, the Black baby, the Black family? Didn't Putin just tell all that? They got all the documents, the artifacts, the statistics. But y'all want to still tell us Jesus, this white man, gonna come and save us. When in this book right here, I was looking for it. They strung our brother up, and when I find it, I'm gonna go live again with it. They strung our brother up and put that 2x4 on him and marched him and executed him. That's our Jesus. I know we need hope, but damn it, stop misleading us with it, because you listening to your white friends and stuff. Stop doing us like this. We're at the end now. This is it. This is it. We ain't got to sacrifice us no more. Y'all don't have to sacrifice us no more. Shit, life as we know it is pretty much over. Mankind and humanity need to be saved. And as far as us being the same, no, we not the same. Everything is different. We are biologically different from white folks. And you know that. Everything, our amino acids is different. Our biology is different. Our carbon melanin content is different. Our teeth structure is different. Our hair is different. Our bodies hold more electrolytes, minerals, and salts than anybody. Our hydrochloric acids in our stomachs is 10 times weaker. Our intestines is much shorter. But we do everything according to white folks' standards. That's why we fucked up mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So just stop, just stop telling us, that we got to continually ignore where our hurt lies, where our disconnect lies with us because of white folks. Tell them what they need to be doing, because they're still out terrorizing Black folks. Listen to Black media. The channels are all over YouTube, TikTok, wherever the social media is at. That's why I'm on here. Because our ancestors refused to be ignored some more. Pastor, if you get my video, I kind of hope that earlier part didn't go through, because, yeah, I went there. These are our texts to racial reconciliation. We're not overlooking this, not no more. Now, if you want to take your family, your congregation in these waters that's still churning, then you do that. But don't come out here and tell us to do it when you know, Pastor, that we ain't got no healing from this yet. We so bad on ourselves because of this, because we let this happen. Self-hatred, we hate ourselves. And you want us to reconcile, racial reconciliation? We trying to reconcile with our damn self. Oh, I apologize, ancestors. I do apologize with that because we not damned. We need to stop saying that too. I've been trying, but it's hard to break these little, curses. These little phrases we be saying. So yeah, we not damned. How about, well, I'm not damned. But anyway, we finna get to our reading and stuff because I don't know what Pastor and them talking about. But we not finna do it. Nope. And if y'all will, then go on with Pastor and them. Go on with Pastor and them then. Shit, ain't your heart what the hell is up. You ain't gotta let them sit there and keep telling you that, oh, now you got to sacrifice some more. You got to sacrifice some more? You got to jeopardize your livelihood some more? Hell, when do we matter collectively? I just want to know, when do we matter? When can we matter collectively? When can we care about us as a people? Pastor? Hell, everybody is a pawn. Everybody is a pawn in the theft of melanin. But don't be using us. No, don't be using us. Don't be sacrificing us. Don't be telling us, oh, racial reconciliation begins in the Bible. Is the Bible sufficient? No, it's not sufficient. The Bible is not the book for racial reconciliation. This is the book for racial reconciliation. This is the book for racial reconciliation. This is the book for racial reconciliation. Let's pull out a couple of texts. We ain't just got to use the Bible. No, we got a couple of things that we can do. We got a couple of things we can do. Oh, yeah. We don't have to do that. No. No, we don't have to do that. Why we got to give it up again? Where's white fragility? That book, White Fragility. How fragile white people is and stuff. We didn't do none of that. These are the texts for racial reconciliation. Pastor, no, y'all not finna sit there and keep misleading us. This is the book for racial reconciliation. If there's to be any reconciliation. Because in this awakening, another awakening. Well, I ain't damned. We're in another awakening. Can we reconcile with ourselves? Pastor, can you and your brethren, can you tell your brethren that first of everything, they need to go hard for our reparations? Because before little San Diego and Sophia and Bing 78 and all these robots and flying cars and all this shit and the purple lights like they got out there in the Apple Valley and stuff, get the rolling in this 5G network, this whole Jetson fantasy. Can you tell them to go hard for our reparations? It's clearly no doubt that we deserve reparations for what was done to our ancestors. And they can help us. Dr. Claude Anderson has a wonderful Black agenda for us. So does the Defiant Lawyer Network, Augustus Corbett. We got some Black agendas that your white brethren can help us with. Since you want to reconcile. Yeah. But yeah, let's go ahead and get to our reading. Because we on chapter 3, baby. Sure will. And and this is Face the Nation on Bolden Unchained. And I'm here to assist in the uncovering and the confrontations and the confronting of all the agendas, all the programs, all the projects against Black America. That's why we here. Yep, Bolden Unchained. That's why we here. And we ain't going nowhere either. No, we gonna find out exactly. We gonna remember exactly what we need to remember. Yeah. And this right here is chapter 3. The book is Racial Violence in Kentucky, 1865 to 1940. And I bet some of these people still alive, just like the video from last night. The trucker was saying that he stopped in a diner. Look at my last video. He stopped in a diner, and the 89-year-old white man was celebrating his birthday. And brother wished him happy birthday and told him, wow, almost 100. I know you got some memories. And that little old white man, he said, boy, do I have some memories. As a firefighter, this man, all of them would go to them fires, accidents, burning buildings, whatever. And they would see the black kids, the black victims needing help, and they wouldn't help them. And he remembered that one baby that he made eye-to-eye contact with. And he walked away and left that baby burning in that fire. So no, don't tell us that the Bible is going to be our racial reconciliation. Because it's not. It's part of social media, the internet, probably in chaos right now, just thinking about how could you walk away and leave babies in a burning fire? Now he old. He's old now. He's thinking about dying. It's on his mind. That baby won't let him rest. He's been having nightmares all these decades. All these decades. So we say, oh, he's just the sweetest old man you ever seen. He should be. He should be. Short of giving up everything that he worked and earned for any black person that he see in need. That's all he could do. That's all he could do. But he done lived a happy, posh life. He done lived a good, comfortable life. Now he thinking about them babies he let burn up. And don't nobody know where nobody going when we leave from this plane. We need to stop being so gullible and naive, thinking that a white man with blonde hair and blue eyes is finna come and rescue us, save us. We gonna get our heaven. We gonna get all our wealth that's being stored up in heaven. We better go a little bit further than heaven. You know what that man said in this book right here? He saw I had a spiritual vision too. He had a spiritual vision too now. And he saw rolled white men on horses riding, galloping across the sky in the United States. That's why he formed the Ku Klux Klan. So, Black America, you might want to reconsider everything. You might want to go a little bit further past heaven. Don't get yourself behind them pearly white gates. Because I don't know how you're going to get out. Go on to the afterlife when you leave here. Emmett Till not with Carolyn Bryant in no heaven. Emmett Till is not with Carolyn Bryant in heaven. Her husband and her brother, what they did to that boy, that young black baby, he wasn't but 14. The ancestors is not with the very ones that tortured them, skinned them alive, dismembered them, roasted them. How can we keep them trapped again? Just think. Think, people. Think. I know my heart beating fast too. Because it touches us. This is us. They are us. That's why we're scared. We're scared to tell white folks what you've done to us. What you've made us. And you still refuse to acknowledge us and pay us. No. This time you're going to make this right and make it right. White America, if y'all not going to be sincere with us, every aspect of our life is wrapped up in y'all. Pastor can't even see himself. He can't even see his life without white folks. We can't see our life without y'all. Even all the hell you keep us in, you put us in, you put us through. You created hell for us. This hell. So yeah, don't be telling us we finna forget some more. Forget some more. No, we ain't finna forget no more. We in another awakening. Black America is in another awakening. This awakening was 1919, the awakening of Black America. Now we in another awakening. If we had something that we could say, yeah, white folks have been sincere. White folks have been sincere with us. White folks have really felt remorse and tried to make amends for what their ancestors have done to us. But that hasn't happened. They ain't made no sincere. They ain't made no sincere efforts to help Black America. That's a lie. Everything that they've built up, everything that they've made and created has been against Black America. And y'all know it. I don't know why y'all keep lying to us. Because you ain't got to no more. Life as we know it is over. Look around us. Life as we know it is over. For crying out loud, they trying to block out the sun. We ain't got no foods that we can eat without critiquing it. Yeah, you better watch out the foods you eating and stuff too. Look at your fruits. If it begins with a 4, or get the fruit that begins with a 9 because it's organic. I'll do another live on that and stuff, but it's all over YouTube and TikTok. Get your ass to some Black media and get off of mainstream media. Should be mainstream media, but Man. Forget our ancestors. The Bible is the text for racial reconciliation. Racial reconciliation. Ooh, all that happened. Racial reconciliation. It's gonna happen right there with the Bible. Why? Because we finna forgive some more. We finna forgive some more. And that's gonna be it. Damnest thing I ever heard. Well, I ain't there. Woo, chapter 3, to hang in an orderly fashion, 1900 to 1940. To hang in an orderly fashion. From 1900 to 1940, 70 people, 61 blacks and 9 whites, were lynched in Kentucky. A considerable decline from 166 during the previous 25 years and 117 in the first decade of emancipation. And of the lynchings in Kentucky that have occurred in this century, 44 of them, 63%, occurred in the first decade of the century. Even so, 44 signaled a significant decline from 92 in the 1890s, and the decline will continue with 18 lynchings from 1911 to 1920, 7 in 1920s, and 2 in 1930s. Although the number of lynchings steadily declined in Kentucky, it is difficult to see why some years had 1 or no lynchings, while other years experienced several. In 1900, only 1 lynching occurred. Then the next 2 years, however, there were 16 lynchings. Yet after climbing to 9 lynchings in 1902, the number dropped to 2 in 1903 and remained at no more than 3 in any year until 1908, when 14 people, 13 Afro-Americans and a single white, were killed. The Night Riders were largely responsible for much of the violence in 1908. By 1910, state officials had taken steps to end the lawless acts of the Night Riders, and Kentucky experienced its first year without a recorded lynching since 1875. Interestingly, however, the next 5 years, 1911 to 1915, witnessed 12 lynchings in Kentucky. During the First World War, a time when lynchings increased again throughout the nation, no rise occurred in the Bluegrass State. Indeed, from 1917 to 1920, there were only 4 lynchings in the state. That whites covered up many lynchings is an important reason for their apparent decline in the 20th century. To be sure, the exact number of lynchings for any time period is difficult to determine. Yet many lynchings from the 1880s and 1890s can be documented because they were held in public. But by the 1920s, after Kentucky had passed legislation calling for stiff penalties for members of lynch mobs and had elected officials willing to press for arrests and convictions, it is clear that several lynchings were covered up with claims that heavily armed blacks had fired on whites. In July 1929, details were released about 2 black men shooting and killing John O. Silvey, Silvey, a railroad foreman in Greenup. Silvey had supposedly ordered the men to leave the property of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, and they returned and ambushed him. A posse was formed, comprising the sheriff and white railroad workers. According to the members of the posse, they had no choice but to kill the 2 blacks because they would not surrender. Walter White of the National Office of the NAACP wrote to Edward E. Underwood, a black physician who served as president of the Frankfurt branch, urging him to investigate the matter. It has been our experience that within recent years, due to publicity against lynchings, there is a marked tendency to cover up lynchings by calling them murders or killings by posses, White explained. Of the 70 lynchings, 26%, were for rape or attempted rape, which is comparable to the 19th century, when 28% of the total lynchings had been attributed to this offense. In many cases of lynchings as a result of rape, the problem remains one of fully understanding the relationship between the alleged black rapist and the white victim. On several occasions, it was rumored, at least among Afro-Americans, that an intimate relationship had existed. In the lynching of Silas Esters, Silas Esters, in Hodgenville, the sources are vague on details of the incident, leading one to speculate that a homosexual act, either a rape or a mutually agreed relationship, had occurred. Esters was arrested in October 1901, charged with forcing Granville Ward, W-A-R-D, a 15-year-old white boy, to commit an unnameable act. A mob of 75 men, led by Thomas Ward, the boy's father, demanded the keys to the jail, which were freely given to them. The mob then took Estes to the courthouse yard to hang him. But before he could be hanged, the mob riddled his body with bullets. Continuity existed from the old century to the new in the lynching of Afro-Americans accused of raping white women. Whites justified the lynchings of black rapists as the best way to end the assaults and as a warning to other blacks not to commit such an offense. Before lynching a black for rape, the mob maintained the tradition of having the woman identify her attacker. In February 1902, Della Powell, one of Jessamine's most estimable young ladies, was assaulted on her way home from school. Although dazed, she somehow made it to her brother's house and told of the incident, saying her attacker was a heavy-set yellow Negro. Shortly thereafter, Thomas Brown was arrested. Police officials took him to Miss Powell, who quickly identified Brown as her attacker. That evening, a mob, led by Powell's relatives, requested that officials take Brown once again to be identified because some of Nicholasville's best and most law-abiding citizens wanted to be sure that Brown was the guilty party. After this was done, and before Brown was returned to jail, the good citizens of Nicholasville hanged him in the courthouse yard. A lot of these courthouses in our towns and stuff was used for lynchings. I wonder how many. In its editorial, the local newspaper proclaimed its outrage at any act of lawlessness, even lynching a Negro fiend like Thomas Brown, who met the death that all such villains deserved. Yet, after condemning local whites for the lynching, the editor concluded with a warning that the reminiscent of many written in the 19th century. May this serve as an abject lesson to all who harbor these fiendish thoughts in their minds, that our daughters, wives, sisters, and mothers may have protection from such red-handed scoundrels. That the Nicholasville mob felt compelled to take Tom Brown before Powell for a second look suggests that she might have been unsure about the identity of the rapist. Just as in times past, however, blacks were lynched even if the white woman had doubts about the man in custody. Ernest Baker was arrested in Cadiz, C-A-D-I-Z, after an attempted rape had been made on Mary Gentry. For whatever reason, from a state of shock or because it was dark and the man had sneaked up on her, Gentry could not positively identify Baker as the attacker. Nevertheless, a mob spirited Baker from the jail and lynched him. Sometimes the husbands and fathers of rape victims still refuse to conceal their identities, and exacted their revenge on blacks. Unafraid of being prosecuted for taking part in a lynching, they felt it was an honor. Like today, they feel it's an honor to kill a black person. A 1905 lynching in Normandy resembled in some respects the fictional account from Hallie Rive's book, Smoking Flats. Lon Beard was arrested and charged with the attempted rape of Mrs. Chester Crawford in Spencer County. Fearing for the black man's safety, the sheriff decided to take Beard by train to Shelbyville for safekeeping until the trial. Y'all know, I think we read this chapter. When the train stopped in Normandy, 25 men, including Chester Crawford, went on board. Even though Beard was handcuffed between the sheriff and a deputy, Chester Crawford, whom the white newspaper described as mild-mannered young farmer, shot Beard 7 times. Crawford was immediately arrested, but without leaving the room, and with the Negro's body still on the floor, the bond was signed, fixed at $1,000 by 15 of the best men in the county. And accompanied by a few friends, Crawford went to his home. The outcome of the case is unknown, but the paper speculated, probably correctly, that Crawford would not be prosecuted. It is the general impression that no action whatever would be taken in the case by the grand jury. The Negro bore a bad reputation in the neighborhood, and his tragic death was no surprise, as it had been predicted that he would sooner or later be shot to death. On one occasion, the mob restrained a father from killing a black accused of attempting to rape the man's daughter so that they could hang him in an orderly fashion. On one occasion, the mob restrained a father from killing a black accused of attempting to rape the man's daughter so that they could hang him in an orderly fashion. In April 1909, Ruth Gee, G-E-E, was allegedly raped in Flat Lick near the Christian Trigg County border. After an all-night search, the mob apprehended Benny Booker Brame, B-R-A-M-E. They took him before the girl, who made a positive identification. The girl's father wanted to shoot Brame on the spot, but the mob refused his request, carried Brame back to Flat Lick, and hanged him from a tree. The coroner of Christian County was James L. Allensworth, a black man who had held that elective post since 1897. 2 of the 7 men impaneled by Allensworth to rule on Brame's death were also blacks. Despite 3 Afro-Americans taking part in the investigation, no one was charged with the lynching. Allensworth explained that Brame had been dead at least 44 hours when he viewed the body. Therefore, he had no clues to the identity of the mob members. The other men agreed, ruling that Brame was hanged to a tree by parties unknown to this jury. Just as the lynching of one black for attempted rape in Auburn in 1886 ushered in a period during which 4 more were lynched, such seems to have been the case in the new century, though the numbers were not as dramatic. The small community of Elkton, Todd County, had the state's lone lynching in 1900. Fradden Warfield, F-R-A-T-E-N W-A-R-F-I-E-L-D, was jailed on the charge of attempted rape. From the moment of his arrest, threats were made on his life, but the jailer refused to take any steps to prevent a lynching. When the mob came, the jailer turned over the keys without a struggle, and Warfield was lynched quietly and quickly. Almost 5 years later, to the day, another lynching occurred in Elkton. Frank Level, Leavell, Level, a black man whose left leg had been cut off at the knee, was suspected of attempted rape on a white woman. He eluded the police for a while. At a train stop, 3 white men captured Level but decided not to turn him over to the authorities, hoping to get a reward. But upon learning that the reward offered by Todd County officials was only $15, they reluctantly released Level to the Elkton sheriff. That evening, a group of masked men took him from the jail and hanged him from a tree about a mile from town. Several alleged rapes occurred near the Trigg Christian County border in 1909, leading to an uproar among whites and the deaths of at least 2 blacks. In January, Arthur Wilson was convicted and sentenced to death for the rape of a white woman. No record exists of his execution, and in all likelihood, he was not put to death. Taking no chances with the court, the mob in Christian County lynched Benny Bram in April. About 4 months later, it was reported that an attempted rape had occurred in the Caledonia area of Trigg County, Caledonia. A mob, led by the brothers of the intended victim, captured the accused black, Wallace Miller. They decided to take him to the police in Cadiz, but they failed to arrive in town. It was several days before Miller's body was discovered. The details concerning his lynching are so scarce that the exact manner of his death is not known. Miller's lynching is an example of a black being killed quietly, out of the limelight. As we will see in another chapter, the hanging or shooting of blacks in isolated places occurred a number of times in the new century. These highly publicized lynchings involving charges of rape or attempted rape occurred between 1911 and 1920. These incidents would lead many influential citizens, white as well as black, to denounce mob justice. Around 2 o'clock on January the 15th, 1911, at least 50 masked men entered Shelbyville. They turned off the electric power, cut the telephone wires, and proceeded to batter down the door to the jail. They had come for Jim West and Wade Patterson, both accused of detaining a 14-year-old white girl. The jailer offered no resistance. Meanwhile, one of the deputies seized all the keys to the cells and hid in a closet at the rear of the building, proclaiming that he would die before turning over the keys. The mob simply ignored the deputy and broke the lock to the cell holding the blacks. There were 8 blacks in the cell, and in addition to taking West and Patterson, the mob decided to hang Eugene Marshall, who had been convicted of killing an elderly black woman. As the lynch mob left the jail with 3 black men, it had taken almost an hour to break the lock. The 2 whites on duty did not intervene, explaining later that it would have been futile to draw their guns. The mob carried the 3 black men to the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad Bridge. The site of the lynching of Jimbo Fields and Clarence Garnett a decade earlier, and hanged them. and hanged them, or so they thought. The men were thrown over the bridge at the same time, but the rope holding Patterson broke, and he fell into the water and attempted to escape. Members of the mob jumped into the water and started chasing him. Patterson's body would be found at the 7th Street Bridge, some 300 yards from the Chesapeake and Ohio Bridge, riddled with bullets. Meanwhile, Marshall strangled to death, but West, who was left dangling, somehow untied his hands, removed his head from the noose, fell into the creek, and escaped. The Courier Journal reported an all-day search failed to reveal the body of the third Negro, but that he met a violent death, no one here doubts. But in the days after the incident, members of the mob grew worried that West might reappear and identify them. Law enforcement officers staked out his home and urged his family to turn him in. About a week after West's near lynching, his relatives announced to the press that he had made a successful escape. White law officers mounted a search for West, and the Shelby County judge offered a $200 reward for his return. The state's Republican governor, Augustus E. Wilson, Willson, an outspoken foe of lynchings, refused to offer a reward for West, but put up $500 for the arrest and conviction of each member of the lynch mob, a step which led to the white citizens of Shelby County to denounce the governor. Ultimately, no one collected on either reward. Several months after the lynchings, the Shelby County grand jury investigated the crimes, but not surprisingly, no indictments against members of the mob came out of the hearings. West's exact whereabouts remained unknown for years. He would enlist in the United States Army and fight in the First World War. West, who almost died at the end of a rope on a railroad bridge in 1911, lived another 11 years, though the cause of his death, much like his life, remains a mystery. What is known, however, is that when his body was returned to Shelbyville for burial, he was treated as a hero by African Americans. Shelby County officials were condemned for the lynchings and for their failure to prosecute members of the mob. Rumors that West and Patterson would be lynched had circulated for several days, yet nothing had been done to protect the men. Governor Wilson expressed his feelings about lynching when he offered the rewards for members of the mob. An editorial in the New York Times criticized the jailer for not protecting the prisoners, saying that no harm would have come to him and his family. The Courier Journal, in an editorial entitled "Shelbyville's Peace Conservators," expressed contempt for the law officers. The jailer's plan of defending the jail from mob attack and protecting his prisoners was to squat in a dark corner with the keys in his pocket. Apparently, it did not occur to the jailer that his presence as guardian of the keys was not strictly necessary, while his presence at the jail door, if he had been willing to shoot, might have dispersed the mob. Whether it was mere cowardice or mere stupidity, it is not apparent. It is a matter into which the grand jury might profitably inquire. Law officers in Shelbyville might have been criminally negligent in the case, the Courier Journal concluded. Such actions were not confined to the central part of the state. In Western Kentucky, 2 blacks were lynched in Paducah in October 1916 in broad daylight before a white crowd estimated from 5,000 people to 10,000 people. This lynching was significant for several reasons. First, while most of the lynchings during the 20th century took place in small rural areas, this episode occurred in the largest city in Western Kentucky, with a population of more than 25,000 people. The mob's intentions were well known, yet nothing was done. By this time, the mid-1910s, lynching in many places in the state had been prevented by removing the accused black to Lexington or Louisville. Also, it took the mob several hours to break down the jail cell, surely enough time for the police to mobilize in defense of the prisoner. Indeed, immediately after the lynchings, When it was rumored that blacks were arming themselves for revenge, the police quickly deputized dozens of men, proving that it was a relatively simple matter to round up manpower to put down a threatened riot. The motherfuckers. The cause of the lynching was the alleged assault and robbery of Mrs. George D. Ross, ROSS, by an unidentified black man at her home on October the 13th. As soon as they were notified, the police put bloodhounds on the trail of the rapists. All of Western Kentucky, the local paper said, was involved in the massive manhunt. When the man was not found by the end of the first day, a reward was offered. 2 days later, Brock Henley, BROCK, HENLEY, was arrested and charged with the crime. The evidence against him was never fully explained, remaining something of a mystery. Nevertheless, that he would be lynched was a foregone conclusion. Within hours of Henley's arrest, the men involved in the manhunt stormed the jail. Leading the way was the husband of the victim. As a precaution, Henley had been locked in a steel cell, and though the jailer refused to turn over the key, he took no other steps to stop the mob. Members of the lynch mob decided to summon a foundry man to cut the steel bars. This took time. The newspapers differ in how long. One said it took more than an hour, a second paper at least 3 hours, a third paper said 5 hours. Regardless, it is obvious that the police were not interested in preventing the lynching. After taking Henley from the jail, the mob made him walk 3 miles to the home of the victim for a positive identification. Along the way, Circuit Judge William M. Reed, REED, confronted Ross and the other members of the mob and tried to talk them out of the lynching, to no avail. Then an unusual event occurred. It is not clear whether a black man, Luther Durrett, Luther, Durrett, had merely been observing the event, whether he attempted to confront the mob or whether he was identified as a friend of Henley, but the mob decided to lynch him as well. The two men were taken to a site that had been selected for the lynching. Durrett and Henley were hanged, their bodies riddled with bullets, and then burned beyond recognition. Ooh. Mrs. Ross thanked the mob for its approval of the lynching. Miss Ross thanked the mob for its actions, saying, "I did not know I had so many friends." After an examination by a physician, Mrs. Ross declared the lynching of Henley had led to an improvement in her condition. Even though George Ross and the others involved in the lynching made no attempt to conceal their identities, the coroner's report concluded with the usual verdict. Henley and Durrett had died at the hands of a mob composed of unknown persons. This was even more of a farce than usual, since the circuit judge, government officials, and civic leaders of Paducah had witnessed the lynchings. Reed refused to call a special term of the grand jury to investigate the lynchings and to indict leaders of the mob. It would be impossible to secure evidence, he explained. Several days later, after protests were registered from outside the area, the grand jury did look into the matter. Nothing came of their deliberations. Interestingly, the Ross family left Paducah, citing a fear of revenge by blacks as their reason for leaving. Of all the newspapers covering the lynching, The Courier-Journal responded with the sharpest attack. The lynching at Paducah was an exhibition of bestiality too disgusting to be described adequately. Everyone knew the possibility of it happening in Paducah was great, yet no effort was made to take the prisoner out of danger or to offer real protection. Those features made the degradation of Paducah complete. Meanwhile, the Paducah newspaper refused editorial comment on the lynching, apparently concluding that enough was being said by papers elsewhere. The third highly publicized lynching occurred at the end of March 1920. Grant Smith, who worked as a laborer on the Anderson farm in Maysville, was accused of raping 14-year-old Ruby Anderson. Smith eluded the authorities for more than 2 months before being captured in Pontiac, Michigan. Instead of returning him to Maysville, the authorities held Smith in Covington until his trial. 21 years earlier, the lynch mob from Maysville had been informed of Richard Coleman's every move in the Covington jail, and so too were the men who vowed to lynch Smith upon his return to Maysville. After receiving a tip about the train on which Smith was to return, they made plans to burn him alive. Whew. After receiving a tip about the train on which Smith was to return, they made plans to burn him alive, just as the mob had done to Coleman. The lynchers, numbering about 40, stopped the train at the Maysville-Lexington Turnpike and removed Smith. Fearful of the authorities, however, they decided not to burn Smith, but settled for hanging him from a telephone pole. Several weeks later, the Courier-Journal published a story by 2 women reporters from a small weekly newspaper who had been allowed to witness the lynching. They boasted about their scoop of being the only reporters to witness the Smith lynching. Both women approved of the lynching and referred to Smith in derogatory terms. One noted, "There hung the blackest Negro you ever saw." Not to be outdone, the second one said, "The moonlight shone full on the darky." The moonlight shone full on the darky. By the time of Smith's death, the National Office of the NAACP had adopted a policy of investigating every lynching in the nation. Contact was made with a Black physician in Maysville to look into the matter. After several weeks of snooping around, Dr. W.C. Patton, P-A-T-T-O-N, wrote to the National Office about the case. His primary contacts were several Black women who had worked as domestics over the years in the Anderson home. Patton noted that the white girl, Ruby Anderson, was considerably older than 14, as she had been mentioned repeatedly in the papers. Even more significant, however, was his conclusion that Grant Smith and Ruby Anderson had been involved sexually, and the agreement was mutual. Smith's widow knew about the relationship, but she, like the Black domestics, was afraid to talk about the matter publicly. Patton ended his letter by denouncing Maysville whites for being hypocritical regarding interracial sex. At the same time, almost that this man was being lynched, a younger colored girl was giving birth to one of the members of a family in whose employ she was. and the mother of the girl has to take it. I wish you only knew just half of what happens to black people in Maysville, Kentucky. Patton concluded. Oh. Although alleged rapes by Afro-Americans may have aroused the most fury among whites and received far more coverage in state and national newspapers than any other crimes, in actuality, more Kentucky blacks died at the hands of lynch mobs for murder or attempted murder than for any other offense in the 20th century. Of the 70 lynchings, 28, 40%, resulted from murder or attempted murder. Prosperity. Clearly, and I say prosperity when we sneeze instead of bless you. Bless you is broken down. It means be less you. Be less you. Bless you. And I don't want to be less none of y'all. So I say prosperity. Intentionally. Clearly, whites remain determined to punish with a vengeance any black accused of committing a violent crime or who has simply defended himself. Prosperity. Shelbyville was the site of the mob deaths of Jimbo Fields and Clarence Garnett in October 1901. According to the newspapers, these two teenagers, Fields was 16 and Garnett was 18, murdered Will C. Hart, a white man who was romantically involved with Fields' mother, Annie. On the night of the murder, the two youths had supposedly argued with Hart at the Fields' home. After Hart's body was discovered near the residence, the teenagers were arrested. When rumors of a lynching surfaced, the jailer took steps to guard the young men, but opted not to transport them to Louisville for safekeeping. The jailer, Ben Perkins, repelled the first attempt by the mob to storm the building. But several nights later, the mob returned. Perkins refused to open the door. Without further parley, one of the mob produced the key to the lower door, which had been taken when the other attempted to lynch them was made. Without further parley, P-A-R-L-E-Y. Without further parley, one of the mob produced the key to the lower door, which had been taken when the other attempt to lynch them was made. Using a sledgehammer, mob members broke down the cell door. Meanwhile, the jailer's wife, who was already ill, became so overcome with shock and fear that she suffered a fatal heart attack. The two youths were removed to the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad trestle, only 500 yards from the county jail, and hanged. Although the lynchings had occurred at night, the bodies were not cut down until late the next day, after having been viewed by hundreds of people, including school children and the delegates of the Kentucky Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Including school children and the delegates of the Kentucky Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church, who were attending a convention in Shelbyville. 3 years later, a lynch mob killed a black woman in Lebanon Junction for the murder of a white farmer. Marie Thompson, Thompson, referred to by one reporter as a Negro Amazon, had attempted to break up an argument between John Irvin, I-R-V-I-N, and her son over a missing pair of pliers. Thompson claimed that she cut Irvin with a razor in self-defense, a statement that undoubtedly would have saved her life if she had been a white woman. Thompson, however, was arrested and charged with murder. A group of black men guarded the jail and prevented the mob's first attempt to spring Thompson. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, the mob, meeting no opposition from the authorities, took the woman and tried to lynch her from a tree in the jail yard. Thompson refused to die without a fight. The woman was struggling and fighting like a tiger all the time, but the mob was too much for her, and a minute later, she was swinging in the air with her feet several inches from the ground. All of a sudden, she twisted around and grabbed the man by the collar, jerked the knife from his hands, and cut the rope that was choking the life out of her. Dropping to the ground, Thompson started swinging at the men. She eventually broke away, but was shot down in a hail of gunfire. Several lynchings resulted after whites expressed disapproval over the sentences given blacks for murdering whites. In Elizabethtown in 1902, Harlan Buckles, Harlan Buckles, was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Deputy Marshal Robert Reed, Reid. The cause of the murder is unknown, but for Buckles to be given life in prison instead of death for the murder of a law officer suggests that some aspects of self-defense might have been involved. Nevertheless, the day after his sentencing, but before he had been removed to the state prison, Buckles was taken from the jail by 75 men and hanged. In London, several years later, Virgil Bowers, Virgil Bowers, was taken from jail and lynched after he had been sentenced to life for the murder of a white man. Circuit Judge H.C. Faulkner of Laurel County was outraged by the mob's act and called for a thorough investigation of the incident. In a very moving speech to the grand jury, the judge said the law had been served in the case by sentencing Bowers to prison. You can imagine my horror when, upon being awakened at midnight, I found that citizens had taken this man from the jail and hung him almost under the shadow of your courthouse. Already, there are those in your midst who are apologists for the members of this mob. No sophistry can whitewash their character. They will live and die as common murderers and fill a murderer's grave. They are infinitely worse than Virgil Bowers. They took an unarmed man from his cell in the jail and from the officers of the law and killed him, murdered him in cold blood, and sneaked away to their homes. And their wives, their children, their families, their neighbors, everyone knew, accepted it. It was a part of life. That's what they did. That's what they relived and told these stories decades and decades and holidays after holidays, until it became to the point of don't tell the next generation. We're not going to tell all the next generation. Don't tell all of them. No, the Bible ain't our text for racial reconciliation. That's a lie. In 1921, Richard James was convicted of the murder of 2 white men in Midway. Although it found James guilty, the all-white jury failed to agree on a penalty. After the jury had been hopelessly deadlocked for some hours, the 4 men told the judge that no verdict could be reached. A mob then decided to administer its own punishment. James was taken from the jail and hanged. The grand jury hastily investigated the lynching before making the usual conclusion, and the county judge refused to offer a reward for the killers, saying it would be a waste of time. The lynchings of Miller in 1893 and of Coleman at the end of that decade, both for rape and murder, have received more publicity than any other lynching in the 19th century. But in the new century, one case involving attempted murder received national and international attention because of the manner in which the mob chose to lynch its black victim. Undoubtedly, were it not for the April 1911 lynching in Livermore, that small western Kentucky community would have been just as unknown as the American public, as were the hundreds of other small towns and villages scattered throughout the state. Will Porter, Porter, a black man, shot Frank Mitchell during a ballroom brawl. Porter was arrested. At this point, the versions of what happened differ. The account from the New York Times says that the sheriff, fearing a lynching, took Porter to the local opera house for safekeeping. All the doors were bolted and the prisoner hidden in the basement under the stage. But the mob easily found Porter and quickly decided to kill him right there in the opera house. Right there. The shooting of the Negro was done in a weird scene. Against the wall props, long unused, were bare windows. And startled from the night's rest, rats scurried across the floor. Against such a background, the Negro was bound hand and foot and placed in the center of the stage. Many of the lights, when the current was turned on, refused to burn. And in the semi-darkness, the mob silhouetted against the theater walls. Awaited the signal of their leader. When it was given, 50 guns fired in unison. One piercing scream was heard, and their work was over. The lights were extinguished, the curtains lowered, and the mob then filed out. An editorial followed the story, explaining that Livermore whites had found a new way to lynch Afro-Americans. Whatever else may be said about the inhabitants of Livermore, Kentucky, it cannot be denied that in them, the dramatic sense is strongly developed. The editorial ended with a tone of sarcasm. Talking about the lynching, it may even be called reformative, the highest praise that can be given to any punishment, since it is quite certain that the Negro who made in the Livermore Opera House his first and last appearance on the stage will never again offend the delicate and tender sensibilities of his fellow townsmen. A second version, the one popularized by several Kentucky newspapers and given a national audience by the NAACP, says that a mob took Porter from the jail to the Opera House and charged admission to see the lynching. Those who bought orchestra seats had the privilege of emptying their six-shooters at the swaying form above them, but the gallery occupants were limited to one shot, and the money taken in at the door went to the family of the white man the Negro had killed. The dramatic details of the lynching of Will Porter were used by the NAACP in its campaign to pass a national anti-lynching bill and further fueled the fires in Kentucky for similar legislation. At its May 2, 1911 board meeting, the executive committee of the NAACP adopted a resolution condemning Porter's lynching. They sent a memorial to the president and the members of Congress, urging them to denounce publicly the practice of lynching. A letter was written to Governor Wilson. He responded positively, saying that he wanted the lynchers brought to justice. White citizens in various parts of Kentucky called for the arrest of the lynchers. That same month, the McLean County Grand Jury returned indictments and issued arrest warrants for 18 men for their involvement in the lynching. Practically all of the men indicted are well known in Livermore, Kentucky, in Livermore and McLean County. And the news of the action of the grand jury came like a bolt, a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Of the 18, Lawrence Mitchell, the brother of the man Porter shot, and 2 others were cited as the leaders and were indicted separately on a charge of murder. The bonds for the men ranged from $500 to $1,000. So the bail was $5 and $10. Or was it $50 and $100? Well, the county attorney promised to prosecute the men fully to erase the blot on the fair name of McLean County. Despite his promise to press for convictions of the men on a charge of murder, all of the defendants won quick acquittal. Nevertheless, they have been identified, arrested, and tried, something unheard of in Kentucky. At least 7 blacks accused of murder or attempted murder were lynched in Kentucky in the 2 decades following Porter's lynching. Several of the cases involved Afro-Americans who were described by white newspapers as bad men, involved in many criminal violations. Charlie Lewis, a war veteran, was lynched in Hickman after he allegedly assaulted the sheriff while resisting arrest. My father's from Hickman, Kentucky. The lynchers justified their action in part by saying that several years earlier, Lewis had killed a white man. In 1926, when Primus Kirby, Primus Kirby, was lynched in Guthrie for the murders of his wife and a law officer, the newspaper made much of the fact that he had recently been released from prison. Yet, in contrast to Lewis and Kirby, most of the other blacks lynched during the 1920s and the 1930s were not habitual criminals, but had the misfortune of becoming involved in disputes with whites. At least 2 lynchings resulted from love triangles. Leonard Woods argued with 2 white men who had been joyriding with 2 black women. Woods killed one of the men in a fight. Along with Woods, the 2 black women were arrested. According to an anonymous source, the high sheriff, M.T. Reynolds, 2 deputies, and all other peace officers were there and watched the mob at work in breaking into the jail. Woods and the 2 women were taken to a wooded area to be lynched. The white man involved in the incident pleaded that the women's lives be spared, and the mob relented, allowing them to return to jail. Woods was shot and his body burned. The lynching of Woods was the last one of a black man in Kentucky for 7 years. But during that time, 2 white men were lynched. Chester Fugate in Breathitt, Chesterfugate, in Breathitt County on December the 25th, 1929, and Walter Merrick, Merrick, in Princeton on June the 1st, 1932. The last recorded lynching in Kentucky occurred in Hazard in January of 1934. Rex Scott, a black coal miner who had served time in prison, was standing outside a restaurant near an area frequented by white prostitutes. When Alex B. Johnson, a white man who also worked in the mines, approached him and made an insulting remark. According to the report of the NAACP, Johnson had been drinking liquor and was in a quarrelsome frame of mind. A fight quickly broke out between the 2 men. At some point, Scott struck Johnson in the face, knocking him to the pavement. While Johnson was on the ground, Scott struck him again, this time on the right side of the head. While Johnson was being carried to the local hospital, Scott was being arrested for attempted murder. Johnson died without ever regaining consciousness. Scott was charged with the murder of a white man in Perry County, an area where tensions had remained high since the hotly contested sheriff's election the previous November. The loser, who had challenged the vote on grounds of fraud, had been attacked and killed one morning as he left his home. After the death of his opponent, the sheriff repeatedly failed to take any measures to end crime and vice in Hazard. Rumors circulated that Scott would be lynched by Johnson's friends, yet the sheriff refused to increase security at the jail. On Sunday night, miners from the small communities of Defiance, Defiance, and Vico, Vicco, where Johnson had lived and worked, came to Hazard. Although fully aware that the miners, some of whom were wearing masks, were congregating in the building next door, both the jailer and the turnkey decided not to sound the alarm. When the mob came inside the jail, the turnkey at first attempted to lock himself and the keys in a cell, but quickly changed his mind and simply handed over the keys to the leader. Scott was placed in a truck and driven toward Vico. Unconcerned about law officers pursuing them, the miners casually stopped at a country store and purchased a rope for the hanging. An investigator of the lynching wrote to the NAACP of how Scott met his end. Rex was hanged upon a small sassafras tree, the girth of which was not larger than that of my coat sleeve, and the limb from which they suspended the body was not larger in circumference than a man's thumb. They drew him up until his feet cleared the ground, fastened the rope to the tree, and then shot his body full of bullets. In addition to being lynched for murder, like the one Scott was charged with committing, and rape, Kentucky blacks in the 20th century were summarily executed by white mobs for several other reasons. In the 19th century, other causes had actually been the single largest category of lynchings, and many of these were rather vague and difficult to determine. By contrast, in the 1900s, some lynchings for other causes were specific. 4 blacks were killed for stealing and robbery, 5 for supposedly approving of the murders or rapes of whites, 7 at the hands of night riders. In several additional cases, however, it proved to be impossible to determine the reasons white people gave, if indeed they had given any at all, for the lynching of black people. Of the whites lynched in the 20th century for other causes, 1 died for setting dynamite to a store, and the other 2 were put to death for unknown reasons. Several factors probably account for the decline in lynchings for causes other than murder or rape, because some of the lynchings in the new century received little or no press. Many of the details, including what led to the incident, are lost. More important, however, law officers might have taken steps to prevent lynchings for criminal offenses that did not involve bodily harm to whites. Indeed, on a number of occasions between 1900 and 1930, sheriffs attempted to defend their prisoners in a manner that they had previously refused to do when a white mob threatened to lynch an Afro-American for something other than the rape or the murder of a white person. For scholars of racial violence, a continuing problem is the difficulty in determining whether some deaths of blacks at the hand of white people were murders or lynchings. In 1945, for example, in the small mountain community of Neon, Neon, in Letcher County, Letcher, a group of drunken whites murdered 2 blacks for refusing to dance when ordered to do so. I need a break. I need a motherfucking break. I need a break, y'all. Watch Eddie.
And we think we turn the
Here.
corner. We get the vitriol of the
Here.
Tea Party. And we get a wholesale attack
I gotta learn how to
on
pause
the
this
voting
thing.
rights
I gotta learn how to
of
pause
black
this.
and brown peoples. At every turn, at every moment
Here.
of progress, that progress is arrested by a
Give me
reassertion
a
of
few
the
minutes.
value gap.
Give me a
We
minute.
have to do the work, but we're afraid. We are afraid. White fear has driven this country since its founding. Think about Thomas Jefferson's notes in state of Virginia. I'm gonna come home. I'm trying to get there. Right? Think about, he said, I tremble for this country because of the sin of slavery. Right? He was afraid of what that meant, the divine punishment that would come for holding another human being in slavery. And he writes that particular formulation in the section on habit formation. Because he says, what happens to a child who witnesses the violence of slavery? Something is broken on the inside of such a child who experiences that. Something happens to their character, Jefferson suggests. But in that moment of fear, right, it drives policy. Think about, right, the fear of Abraham Lincoln in the second inaugural, supposedly the second founding. Think about the fear surrounding Black Rage with the Black Panther Party. You know, that cover of the New Yorker where they had Obama dressed as a Muslim and Michelle Obama as Angela Davis. And they were bumping fists, and people were, what does that mean? Did they bump fists? Did the Black people just begin revolution? Fear. Fear drives policy. The moral panic.
Okay, thank you. Where was I at? Because no. So that's why we will not be using the Bible as text for racial reconciliation. Share this video. We will not be using Pastor. The Bible is insufficient for racial reconciliation. In 1945, for example, in the small mountain community of Neon in Letcher County, a group of drunken whites murdered 2 Black people for refusing to dance when ordered to do so. The National Office of the NAACP urged their branches within the state to investigate the incident, calling it a lynching. Except for one letter briefly describing the event, no facts are known about the case. Moreover, under the definition of lynching used in this study, the death of the 2 Negro boys was not a lynching, but a vicious and senseless murder. 12 of the people lynched for causes other than murder or rape died in 1908, all in the western part of the state. Many area farmers had banded together to withhold their tobacco in an attempt to extract a higher price from a tobacco trust. These farmers became outraged when a few of their neighbors refused to join the association. In response, a group that came to be called the Night Riders started destroying crops, burning tobacco barns, whipping reluctant farmers, and ultimately murdering several outspoken foes. The number of whites killed by the Night Riders is unknown, but probably reached a dozen or more. These deaths have not been counted as lynchings in this study since few details exist. Black farmers initially cooperated with the association. Nevertheless, the Night Riders soon targeted Afro-Americans for abuse. This form of violence peaked in the spring and summer of 1908. On the evening of March the 23rd, some 25 to 30 Night Riders invaded Golden Pond, Trigg County, took Tom Weaver from his bed, and ordered him to run. When he refused, the mob shot him to death. Weaver's crime was migrating to the area to pack tobacco for several large companies, and the mob lynched him as a warning to other blacks to steer clear. The lynching of David Walker and his family is an example of how the Night Riders appointed themselves to keep uppity blacks in their place. The precipitating cause is not clearly known. It seems that Walker, a farmer in Hickman, Kentucky, had been involved in a dispute with a white woman, which of course was more than enough of a transgression, which was more than enough of a transgression for whites to take action against the black man. On the night of October 3rd, about 50 Night Riders surrounded Walker's home and ordered him to come out. When he would not do so, several members of the mob poured coal oil on his house and set it on fire. Walker, pleading for mercy for himself and his family, finally opened the door. He was met with gunfire. Walker's wife then appeared at the door. She held in her arms their infant child and begged the Night Riders for mercy. Disregarding her pleadings, the infuriated mob opened fire, and a bullet pierced the body of the infant in his mother's arms. A second one struck the mother in the abdomen, and she fell, still holding the dead body of her infant. Next, 3 children came out to more gunfire. Walker's oldest son, however, refused to leave the burning cabin. As the Courier Journal noted, there is hardly a doubt, but the oldest son of Walker preferred death by burning rather to placing himself at the mercy of the mob, and it is probable that his charred body will be found among the debris. Nothing was done to bring the lynchers of the 7 Walkers to justice. Fulton County whites justified the lynchings by explaining that David Walker had a bad reputation and was a surly Negro. Relying totally on the views of these white people, the Courier Journal noted that Walker had not only cursed a white woman out, but had also threatened to shoot the white man who came to her defense. Was Walker guilty of these offenses? Given all the lynchings that had occurred in Fulton County over the years, Walker surely must have known that hostile actions towards white people, especially a white woman, would result in death for himself and possibly for members of his family as well. Clearly, the paper blamed the black man for the incident. And it said, the mob, it is believed, visited the home of Walker with the original intention of horsewhipping him. But when he fired into their midst, he so aroused their indignation that their thirst for blood was not satiated until the last member of the Walker family had been shot. The paper fails to explain why the night riders brought along coal oil if all they intended to do was whip Walker. Also, the Courier-Journal claims that Walker fired the first shot. This, of course, may have been the case, but again, surely he must have known the consequences for doing so when his house was surrounded by 50 armed men. Logan County, which, like Fulton County, witnessed a series of mob murders of Afro-Americans over the years, had its final lynchings in 1908, when 4 black youths were killed. In July, Rufus Browder, a black sharecropper, argued with James Cunningham, the white farmer for whom he worked. As Browder attempted to walk away, Cunningham cursed him out and struck him with a whip. Then he drew his pistol and shot Browder in the chest, whereupon Browder drew his pistol and shot Cunningham and killed Cunningham. After having his wound treated by a doctor, Browder was arrested and sent to Louisville for safekeeping. Several days later, the police raided a lodge meeting being conducted by 4 black sharecroppers, all friends and lodge brothers of Browder. Supposedly, Virgil, Robert, and Thomas Jones and Joseph Riley had expressed approval of the killing of Cunningham. A rumor was also circulating that the members of the Negro Lodge were targeting several prominent whites for assassination. Even though they were meeting in a private home, the 4 blacks were arrested for disturbing the peace. On the night of August the 1st, 100 men entered the Russellville jail and demanded that the 4 men be turned over to them. The jailer did so. They were hanged from the same cedar tree used to lynch Arch and Dink Proctor on December 18, 1896. A note was pinned to one of the bodies. Let this be a warning to you niggers to let white people alone, or you will go the same way. It is highly possible that the 4 men were lynched because they, like Browder, were farm laborers who were unhappy with their working conditions. The white farmers of Logan County well knew what could happen if all of their poorly paid, overworked black sharecroppers quit the area. A point made by Richard Maxwell Brown might be appropriate to the lynchings in Russellville. Mass lynchings were often done to stop black opposition to white oppression in a given area. As far as can be determined from existing data, fewer Afro-Americans died at the hands of lynch mobs in Kentucky during the first 3 decades of the 20th century than during the last third of the 19th century. Significantly, however, several years in the new century, 1901, 1902, 1903, and 1908, witnessed as many lynchings as some of the worst years of the post-Civil War period. The mob deaths of those years and the others that occurred during this century are a strong indication that many Kentucky whites still did not hesitate to take the law into their own hands, to turn to the rope or the rifle to keep blacks in their place, and to stamp out any acts that suggested militancy on the part of Afro-Americans. And tomorrow, we will be on chapter 4. And I want to just, I want to reiterate to us that the Bible is not sufficient for racial reconciliation. I don't know who that pastor was, but no. Share this video. Let him see it. Share the other ones too. Go find the other videos on YouTube and let him see it. No, that's what his white friends want him to say. These are the books, if they really are serious about racial reconciliation. These are the texts that we must critique and delve to. White folks can help us if they want to. They could have. We have many books, many texts. Don't just go and grab the Bible because it's insufficient. You know the Bible's insufficient. All y'all pastors know the Bible is insufficient for racial reconciliation. And then when you mention worldview, when the pastor mentioned worldview, the whole world views us like white people view us. That's your worldview. What was it? I wrote down that the worldview views us as we are, we don't matter. We are expendable. They treat us, the world views us as white people do. White people in America. And then I had the magnitude of the division is, and we will not be reconciled using the Bible when we have other texts for racial reconciliation. But at this point, I highly doubt that some of us, even most of us, perhaps all of us that are recalling our ancestors, I highly doubt if we want to reconcile. So, Pastor, I think you probably need to do some, research out of that Bible. All of y'all do. Every last one of you. I got pastors in my family. Keep your Bibles, but get out of it and come and look around at some of the other texts. Look around at what's really happening to our people out here. I'm going to find that video. I'm going to find this story. I think it was Ida B. Wells telling about the brother that they strung him up just like Jesus. Just like Jesus. They actually put together the wood to make the cross and put it on him. And when he fell, don't you know they made him get up? I'm going to find it. That's our Jesus. And then you talking about we have the same parents. White people don't come from where we come from. White people do not come from where we come from. At one point, this planet did not even have white people on it. White people only been here a small fraction on this planet. The big head scientist probably can help you out with that. What's his name? Yakub? The big head scientist. He'll give you some insight on it. But I'm going to bed. Good night. It's 2:30. Peace and power to the people. And I will see y'all tomorrow, 12 noon. So that we can get into some more of our Black heroes and sheroes.